Welcome to the Asset Reliability at Work podcast.
Endless journey of delight and profitability.
I think some people use it as a derogatory term towards accountants.
Being visible to the employees is important.
Hey listeners, welcome back for another episode on the Asset Reliability at Work podcast. Today is a very exciting episode for we have Mike Smith joining us today, who is a senior reliability consultant right here at Lifecycle Engineering. And just really quick, a little background on Mike. He has got over 30 years of reliability engineering experience. He has an extensive background that includes lean manufacturing and process excellence methodologies. He is a recognized leader in improving plant availability, speed of production, cost reduction, and quality performance. Interestingly, Mike is also a course facilitator with the Lifecycle Institute, where he instructs all courses related to the reliability engineering certification. So with that being said, welcome to the podcast, Mike. How you doing?
It's having a great day. How about yourself?
I really have nothing to complain about, Mike. It is sunny. It is Charleston. It is 70-degree weather in March. And as always, we have our lovely co-host, Tara Holwegner, here joining us for the podcast. So let's get right down to it. In this episode, the 4 stumbling blocks to effective asset management, Mike is here to highlight some of the most common hindrances preventing manufacturing facilities from achieving a sound state of asset management. So let's dive right into the episode, Mike, and let me ask you this first question, which is, what is an effective asset management plan to you?
An asset management plan is basically how do we ensure that the equipment that we have purchased performs in a manner that we expect it to. In other words, when we turn on the light switch, we want the lights to come on. Basically, whatever we expect the equipment to do and why we purchased it. It's like in your car. When you start the engine, you expect a car to come on. But it also includes the safety equipment. When you want your brakes to apply to your car to slow you down or anything like that, that's just what you expect of it. So there's many different things in an asset plan that we have to include. And we also would expect that car to perform well, like by getting good gas mileage. But it's all in what we purchased that vehicle to do. So that's an asset management plan's expectations.
Okay, I think that's a great analogy that you use. So what is the ultimate goal of an asset management plan?
Well, first and foremost, you need to understand what are your risks to your business. And that can be risks that are safety, environmental, financial, quality, any multitude of things. And then we have to recognize, well, what is our acceptance of that risk? In other words, how much can we tolerate before it becomes a problem? And then defining what can we do to make it better. We also want to look at how do we operate the equipment. And that includes things like what is our expectation of performance rates, performance levels, what is our cost of our raw materials, what is our cost of labor, things that actually impact how we truly make our products. And also we need to address the maintenance side of it. How do we maintain our equipment? Do we understand the hierarchy of our equipment? In other words, what is the parent-child relationships between the equipment, the production lines, all the way up through the plant? We need to understand what is the criticality of the equipment. What that boils down to is truly understanding how important our equipment is to us. Because some of it, there's a lot of risk to. There's other pieces of equipment maybe and other assets that are not as risky. So we certainly want to make sure that we're focusing our efforts and attention on the most critical assets. We also need to understand how do we define a technically based maintenance program. Now, one of the tools that you can do there is either an RCM or an FMEA, where you actually look at how the equipment's function, how can we fail to achieve that function, and what are the failure modes, what type of control activities we put in place, and then can we improve those, ultimately with the goal of reducing the risk. The way that we would do that is identifying those risks, identifying those failure modes, and trying to put into place some type of predictive or condition monitoring, and possibly PMs, traditional type time-based PMs, but whatever can really drive the risk out of the business. And that's what we're ultimately trying to do.
So I thought this whole time that my car running and light bulbs coming on was magic. And now I realize that it's actually built out of a master plan, out of an asset management plan, that there's science and process behind all this. It's not just magic. So This podcast today, we were going to talk about 4 stumbling blocks, because although there is a science and a process, and it takes into account all those issues that you mentioned with regards to risk and operations and maintenance planning, I'm sure that there are some pretty common stumbling blocks. There are some barriers that people have to overcome in order to make an effective asset management plan. So you've come up with 4 that you shared with Derek and I want to start off talking about those. So your first stumbling block that you mentioned with us is lack of knowledge about what your assets are, what assets you really have at your site. So can you talk to me a little bit more about that stumbling block?
It's very surprising at times how little people understand about what they have in their production processes. They don't understand the equipment. They don't know what equipment they've got.
It's magic, Mike. Just kidding.
I know you are. But truly, if you don't understand, if you don't even know what equipment you've got, it's very difficult to operate it and maintain it in a proper manner. And we have to understand that. If we don't, how can we expect ourselves to operate it and maintain it properly? We need to truly, like I was saying earlier, understand what the criticality is. We need to have a good process of management of change or configuration management so that when we do make a change, and we should as we grow and develop our processes, making sure that we do document what we've got, that we do change the operational and maintenance procedures and our CMMS systems and things like that to keep current so that we do really understand it. Because that's one of the biggest issues that we face.
So know what you've got. And then a second stumbling block would be proper maintenance. Talk to me about what that means.
Ultimately, you can have too much maintenance, which flies in the face of what a lot of people will tell you. But if you do a lot of invasive maintenance, you can actually hurt yourself. There's many times that people have the idea that they need to rebuild a gearbox or overhaul an engine or something like that just because they think they need to, whether it really needs it or not. When you do an invasive activity like that, quite often what happens is you're inducing a failure rate to it because of human error, contamination, things like that. So we don't want to do too much, but then the other side of that is quite often we don't do enough. And a good example of that is if you fail to do certain PMs, if you didn't change the oil in your car, it'll run for a while. It won't run real long, but it will run for a while. So we need to make sure that we do not only enough maintenance, but not too much that it causes a problem. Our goal is let's do the right maintenance. And to ensure that that happens, we need to have a good technical basis. And that's why I was mentioning earlier the FMEAs. It's a great tool to help you define on a technical basis what type of maintenance activities you should be doing, because you're focusing on how do you prevent that failure mode.
So the first barrier was make sure you know what assets you have, use your hierarchies, your criticalities, and make sure you have effective change management in place. Second, proper maintenance. So you're not having too much maintenance and too much downtime, or too little maintenance and not enough downtime for your sustaining maintenance. And then the third is lack of managing risk.
Well, if you think about it, what is our job? It's to reduce risk in our business. That's what everyone's job that works for a company. And ultimately, if we don't manage our risks, then we're probably not going to be long-term successful. If you ask a safety or environmental professional, they will define risk as the severity of an incident times the frequency that it occurs. That is a true definition of risk. But in the reliability world, we have one other thing. We're able to understand and predict and identify a failure before it occurs. So in our world, we need to take into account the ability to detect the failure before it happens. Because truthfully, we identify the risks, but if we don't do anything about it, then we really haven't improved our business. So as we identify the risks, we want to make sure that we address the severity and the frequency, but also our ability to detect it using some tools such as condition monitoring, inspections of the equipment by operators, by our maintenance folks, and just doing general predictive and preventive maintenance activities.
You mentioned, I guess we're starting to talk a little bit more about work management. So let's talk about the management system that encompasses all of our maintenance data. Poor CMS utilization is your fourth barrier. So please, tell me what you're thinking about poor CMS utilization.
Unfortunately, it's amazing to me every time that I talk with some people how few people actually utilize their CMMS. Many sites don't even have a CMMS, And some sites don't even do anything with it other than occasionally write work orders with it. The problem is you spent a great deal of money trying to put in this system to support yourself, support your company, but if you don't utilize it, how effective are you? Now, one of the things that, like I said, that people and companies don't do is they don't utilize the power of it. This tool should be able to handle all of your technical data, your prints, your procedures, everything. It should be your driving tool for your work management. So in other words, as you do have work that equipment needs to be repaired, or PMs or predictives or whatever the activities are, it's your guiding tool that keeps that program going for you. It allows your planners and schedulers to do their function to ensure that everything gets done. It also gives you the ability to have information, because in today's world, one of the biggest values that we have is being able to take the information and make decisions that impact our business and move forward. For instance, if you see a piece of equipment that's routinely failing, you may not notice that just as by yourself, but if you have a system that is set up to trigger at a certain failure rate to tell you that you're seeing these failures, then you can do something about it. So it's information, and it's also managing the information and giving us the ability to basically utilize it to improve value.
Well, I think those are 4 stumbling blocks that everybody can relate to regarding asset management planning, which is lack of knowledge about what assets you actually have, making sure that you have proper maintenance and control strategies, managing your risk, and then utilizing your computer maintenance management system to your advantage.
So, Mike, let me throw this at you. About a week ago, or maybe 2, I posted on our LinkedIn page that we were going to have this upcoming podcast episode with you to discuss these stumbling blocks. And so I asked our LinkedIn followers if they had any insights of their own that they thought were stumbling blocks to effective asset management. And we get 2 replies. One was from Juan and the other from Brandon. But Juan said that he thought set and understanding the vision, visualize and mapping the path to get there, the plan and execute the walkthrough of the path, measuring progress and results, and making corrections were a list of things that he thought were hindrances, those stumbling blocks to effective asset management. And Brandon said organizational discipline. Now, I do realize that your opinions, your 4 stumbling blocks were a lot more technical. These are a little bit more broader, more organizational. So what do you think of their responses?
Well, I have to agree with both of them. They're spot on. If you take what Juan said, he is right. If you don't have a defined vision of where you want to go, it's awfully hard to get there.
Sure.
And the fact that, yes, you do put together your plan based on your vision, you measure your achievement of that plan, and then you make changes to it. It's basically the continuous improvement cycle, is exactly what he said. Because if you try to do this without having a good improvement cycle, you're going to stumble. And, we talked about some of the stumbling blocks, but ultimately what he said is true. It's all about putting in place your plan and continuously improving it.
Well, we can't thank you enough for taking the time, Mike, out of your schedule to come on our podcast to talk about the 4 stumbling blocks to effective asset management. And thank you once again for speaking to those audience replies that we had through LinkedIn. So that will wrap up today's episode. But before I let our listeners go, I do want to mention, as always, that we have a few additional resources back on our podcast page, which is lce.com/podcast. And if you go to the show notes for this specific episode, you'll find a couple resources there. One is a slide share that is directly devoted to this topic. And another is a white paper, just a great educational piece of information entitled Lifecycle Asset Management. And then also we have something on there. There's an article that'll link to developing asset management plans, and as well as Mike Smith's LinkedIn URL. So we highly encourage all of our listeners to visit our show notes and to look up a little bit more information if you're curious. But with that being said, we loved having you on the show, Mike, and hopefully you had a good time.
Very much so.
Come
Thank
back
you.
and visit us.
I
Yeah,
appreciate
definitely.
that. Thank you, y'all.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll have Mike on again. And so thank you once again, listeners, for tuning in for another episode on the Asset Reliability at Work podcast. Hey, listeners, one more thing before you go. If you have any feedback for the show, or you have maybe some suggestions for upcoming topics you'd love to hear about, we'd like to hear from you. So there's two ways to get in contact with us. The first is on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @LCE_today, so be sure to follow us. And then the other way is to email the show at podcast@lce.com. Once again, thank you for joining the show, and we look forward to more episodes on the Asset Reliability at Work podcast.